In this episode, we're going to take two words that people use confidently and sometimes incorrectly, and we're going to make them feel clear enough that you can spot when a design is truly protecting privacy and when it is only pretending to. Encryption is often treated like a magic shield, and hashing is often treated like a way to make data disappear, but neither one works that way in real systems. Privacy goals are about limiting who can learn something about a person, limiting how far their information can spread, and limiting the harm if an attacker or an insider gets access. Cryptographic reality is about very specific properties, like secrecy of content, proof of integrity, and the management of keys and secrets over time. When teams confuse those properties, they can create systems that look secure on paper while leaking personal information through weak assumptions, bad key handling, or misuse of algorithms. By the end, you should be able to explain what encryption and hashing do, what they do not do, and how to match the right cryptographic tool to the privacy problem you are actually trying to solve. To build a reliable foundation, start by separating the concepts clearly, because confusion is the root of most mistakes. Encryption is the process of transforming data so that it is unreadable without a secret, and that secret is usually called a key. Hashing is the process of transforming data into a fixed-length value, often called a digest, in a way that is designed to be one-way, meaning you cannot take the digest and recover the original input. Those two tools solve different problems, and they fail in different ways when misused. Encryption protects confidentiality, which is the property that unauthorized parties cannot read content, but it does not automatically control who can request decrypted data because access control still matters. Hashing supports integrity and comparison, such as confirming that a file has not changed, but it does not automatically protect privacy if the input can be guessed, because hashes can be compared and matched. Beginners sometimes hear one way and assume safe, but one way only helps when attackers cannot cheaply guess the input. When you keep these definitions in your head, you are less likely to treat cryptography as a slogan and more likely to treat it as a set of precise tools. Privacy engineers often start with a simple question: what is the harm we are trying to prevent? And what is the attacker or misuse scenario we are defending against? If the harm is that someone could read personal records while they travel over a network, encryption in transit is the relevant tool, but it must be paired with correct authentication so you know who you are talking to. If the harm is that someone could steal a database file or a backup and read it later, encryption at rest is relevant, but it must be paired with strong key management so stolen storage does not come with stolen keys. If the harm is that someone could tamper with a record and cause false decisions, you need integrity controls, which may involve hashing plus additional mechanisms that bind the hash to a trusted identity. Beginners often jump straight to encryption because it sounds like the strongest word, but the reality is that many privacy failures are not about reading raw data, but about using data incorrectly, spreading it into too many places, or reconstructing identities through linkability. Cryptography helps, but it cannot compensate for overcollection, excessive access, or uncontrolled sharing. When privacy goals and cryptographic tools are aligned, encryption and hashing become supporting pillars rather than a thin layer of paint. A practical way to understand encryption is to recognize that there are two broad styles, each useful for different privacy needs. Symmetric encryption uses the same key to encrypt and decrypt, which is efficient and commonly used to protect stored data and high-volume traffic. Asymmetric encryption uses a pair of keys, one public and one private, which supports use cases like securely exchanging secrets or verifying identities at a distance. Public key infrastructure, PKI, is the broader concept that supports managing certificates and trust for these kinds of systems, and it is important because privacy depends on knowing you are not sending data to an imposter. Beginners sometimes assume that encryption automatically proves who you are talking to, but encryption without trustworthy identity checks can still allow a person in the middle to intercept, decrypt, and re-encrypt traffic. This is why identity, certificates, and validation matter as much as the encryption algorithm itself. If you remember that encryption is only as strong as the trust and keys surrounding it, you will understand why many incidents involve not broken math, but broken implementation and broken governance. A privacy-minded engineer always asks not only is it encrypted, but who controls decryption and how is that control enforced? Hashing becomes clearer when you connect it to two different privacy-relevant goals: integrity and safe storage of secrets like passwords. For integrity, hashing allows you to detect changes, because even a small change to the input produces a very different digest, which can be compared later. For password storage, hashing is used so that the system does not store the password itself, which reduces harm if the password database is stolen. However, beginners often misunderstand this and think any hash is enough, when in reality password hashing needs special properties like being slow and resistant to guessing attacks. That is why systems use dedicated password hashing algorithms rather than fast general-purpose hashes, because fast hashes make brute force attacks practical. Another important concept is salting, which means adding random data to the password before hashing so that the same password does not produce the same digest across accounts, reducing the value of pre-computed attacks. The privacy connection is that credential compromise often leads to broad account takeover, which then exposes personal information through valid sessions and permissions. Hashing supports privacy by making credential theft harder, but only when hashing is applied correctly and when system design prevents attackers from testing guesses efficiently. When hashing is treated as a privacy control, it must be treated as a system-level control, not just a database column transformation. One of the most common privacy misconceptions is believing that encryption makes data anonymous, because anonymity is a different goal than confidentiality. Encryption hides content from someone who does not have the key, but the moment an authorized system decrypts the data to use it, the data is fully present again. That means encryption does not remove obligations like minimizing access, limiting retention, and controlling disclosure, because decrypted data can still be copied, logged, exported, and repurposed. Another misconception is believing that encryption at rest means an insider with database access cannot misuse data. But if that insider can query the system that has decryption capability, encryption at rest does not stop misuse. Encryption at rest mainly reduces the risk of data being read from stolen storage or unauthorized infrastructure access, which is important, but not sufficient. Beginners also sometimes assume that encryption alone prevents inference, but inference can happen from metadata, access patterns, and aggregates even when raw content is protected. The privacy lesson is that encryption supports containment, but it does not define purpose, enforce consent, or prevent overcollection. Cryptographic reality is that encryption is one boundary, and privacy is a system of boundaries. When you stop expecting encryption to do everything, you start designing the other controls that actually keep privacy intent intact. Key management is where privacy promises often succeed or fail, because the best encryption algorithm is useless if keys are handled poorly. A key is a secret that enables encryption and decryption, which means whoever controls keys controls access to protected data. Key management includes how keys are generated, how they are stored, who can use them, how they are rotated, and how they are revoked when risk changes. Beginners sometimes picture keys as passwords written somewhere safe, but in real environments, keys must be protected from both theft and accidental exposure, and their use must be logged and controlled. Hardware Security Module, HSM, is a concept for specialized hardware that helps protect keys and perform cryptographic operations without exposing keys to general-purpose systems. And its privacy value is that it reduces the chance that keys are copied or extracted. Key Management System, KMS, is a common concept for centralized key control and auditing, and its privacy value is that it supports consistent policy, rotation, and access tracking. A strong privacy mindset asks where keys live, who can use them, and what happens when a service is compromised, because key compromise often turns encrypted data into plain data instantly. When key management is disciplined, encryption becomes meaningful rather than symbolic. Encryption must also match data handling patterns, because the point where encryption is applied determines what threats it addresses. Full disk encryption on devices helps if a laptop is stolen, but it does not protect data once the device is unlocked and the user is signed in. Database-level encryption protects stored records, but applications still decrypt data to use it, so you must control application access and logging behavior. Field-level encryption can limit exposure by encrypting only the most sensitive fields, but it introduces complexity in searching, indexing, and analytics, which can lead teams to create insecure workarounds if not designed carefully. Transport encryption protects data as it moves, but it does not prevent an authorized endpoint from mishandling the data after receipt. Beginners should connect this to privacy's focus on lifecycle, because data can be protected at one stage and exposed at another if boundaries are inconsistent. Another important point is that encryption can create a false sense of safety that leads to over-retention, because teams think encrypted archives are harmless. But encrypted archives still exist and can still be decrypted if keys remain accessible. Privacy goals are best served when encryption is paired with minimization and retention discipline, so less data exists and it exists for less time. When encryption placement is intentional, it reduces specific risks instead of becoming a generic box to check. Hashing also has practical limits that matter for privacy, especially when the input is drawn from a small or predictable set. If you hash an email address or a phone number and call it de-identified, you may be creating an illusion of privacy because attackers can hash likely values and match them easily. This is why hashed identifiers can still be personal information in many contexts, because the hash functions as a stable identifier that supports linking across datasets. Beginners often think a hash is anonymous because it looks random, but linkability is a privacy risk even when the original value is not visible. A safer approach for many privacy goals is to use randomized tokens or pseudonyms that are not directly computable from the original value, which reduces the ability to reverse or match by guessing. Even then, tokens can become trackable identifiers if they persist too long or are shared across contexts, so governance is still necessary. Another hashing concept is the use of message authentication code, MAC, which combines hashing with a secret key to provide integrity and authenticity, helping ensure data was not changed by someone without the key. The privacy connection is that integrity controls prevent silent manipulation of personal records, which can cause harm through wrong decisions and fraud. When hashing is applied with an honest understanding of predictability and linkability, it supports privacy instead of accidentally undermining it. Another important cryptographic reality is that strong algorithms can be undone by weak randomness, predictable secrets, or careless implementation choices. Encryption often relies on random values for keys and for certain operation modes, and if those random values are weak or repeated, protection can collapse. Beginners do not need to learn mathematical proofs to understand that if secrets are guessable or reused, attackers can exploit patterns. Initialization vectors and nonces are values used in many encryption modes to ensure that encrypting the same message twice does not produce the same output, and misuse can reveal when two records share the same content or allow deeper attacks. The privacy angle is that patterns can reveal personal information even when content is encrypted, such as revealing that two accounts share a rare attribute or that a user repeated the same value across sessions. Implementation mistakes also include hard-coding keys in code, copying keys into logs, or using default keys across environments, all of which can silently compromise confidentiality. Another common pitfall is using outdated algorithms or weak configurations because of legacy compatibility, which creates a weakest link pathway that attackers target. Privacy engineering requires not just choosing encryption and hashing, but ensuring they are used with correct parameters and protected secrets. When you view cryptography as a system, you naturally look for these failure points rather than assuming the math will save you. Digital signatures are another concept worth understanding because they connect cryptography to accountability and trust, which are privacy relevant when systems exchange data. A digital signature uses asymmetric techniques to allow a sender to prove that data came from them and was not modified, without requiring the receiver to share a secret key. This can matter when personal information is exchanged between services, organizations, or components, because tampering could cause false records, unauthorized changes, or fraudulent claims. Beginners sometimes confuse encryption with signing, but signing does not hide content. It proves integrity and origin, which is a different but essential property. When systems rely on signed events or signed configuration updates, they reduce the chance that an attacker can inject or alter data unnoticed. This supports privacy because unauthorized changes to personal records can be as harmful as unauthorized reading, especially when those records drive access decisions, eligibility outcomes, or communications. Signing also supports audits and incident response because it can help establish what data was legitimate and what was manipulated. The broader lesson is that privacy goals include not only secrecy, but also correctness and trustworthiness of personal information over time. When integrity is protected, people are less likely to suffer harm from corrupted or forged data. A realistic privacy program also considers what happens when encrypted data must be searched, analyzed, or processed, because business needs often require using data, not just storing it. Beginners often imagine that once data is encrypted, it can still be queried normally, but encryption often reduces the ability to search or compute on data without exposing it. This tension can lead to dangerous shortcuts, like decrypting large datasets into analytics environments, keeping decrypted copies around, or creating broad access roles so analysts can work faster. A privacy-aware approach tries to process data in ways that minimize exposure, such as using derived attributes, aggregations, or carefully limited views instead of raw decrypted datasets. It also limits where decryption can happen, who can initiate it, and how outputs are controlled, because outputs can leak personal information even when the underlying data was protected. In some cases, a system can separate sensitive identifiers from behavioral data and link them only under controlled conditions, reducing everyday exposure. Even without diving into specialized techniques, the high-level idea is to design workflows so encryption does not become an excuse to centralize raw data and widen access. Privacy intent is preserved when cryptography supports controlled use rather than enabling uncontrolled reuse. When you anticipate the operational need to use data, you can design safer pathways that prevent silent exposure. Encryption and hashing must also be integrated with retention and destruction goals, because privacy is not only about protecting data while it exists, but about ensuring it does not exist longer than necessary. A common misconception is that encrypted data can be kept indefinitely because it is protected, but indefinite retention increases the chance of key compromise, policy changes, and accidental disclosure through restored backups or migrated archives. When retention periods end, data should be deleted or de-identified in a verifiable way, and cryptography can support that by making sure deleted data cannot be reconstructed from leftover copies. Key destruction can be a powerful mechanism when data is encrypted because destroying keys can render encrypted data unreadable, but it must be used carefully so that it does not conflict with legal obligations or needed recovery processes. Beginners should understand that deletion is an outcome across systems, and encryption only helps if keys and data are managed consistently across all copies, including backups and replicas. Another practical point is that hashing can also create persistence, because hashed identifiers may remain in logs or analytics long after a user expects deletion, enabling linkability that undermines privacy intent. Lifecycle discipline therefore requires that derived identifiers and cryptographic artifacts are included in the scope of retention and deletion planning. When cryptographic design supports the lifecycle, privacy promises become credible rather than aspirational. As we conclude, the key message is that encryption and hashing are powerful privacy tools only when they are used with honest expectations and discipline surrounding controls. Encryption protects confidentiality when keys are well managed, when encryption is applied in the right places, and when access to decrypted data is controlled with least privilege and auditing. Hashing supports integrity and safe handling of secrets like passwords when it is applied with the right approach, such as using salts and choosing algorithms suitable for the job, and when you acknowledge that hashes of guessable values can still enable identification. Cryptographic reality also includes the operational details that break protection, like weak randomness, reused secrets, outdated configurations, and verbose logging that leaks sensitive values. Privacy goals are met when cryptography is paired with minimization, controlled disclosure, disciplined retention, and verifiable destruction, so protected data does not spread and does not linger unnecessarily. When you can explain not just that data is encrypted or hashed, but why that choice matches the threat and how keys, access, and lifecycle are governed, you demonstrate the kind of thinking this domain rewards. The most reliable outcome is a system where privacy does not depend on believing in magic, but on designing boundaries that hold under pressure, change, and real-world mistakes.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.